This is the Bak Up Podcast, where technology meets humor. I'm your host, Ioannis Bakayanis. If you like the content, subscribe on YouTube or any other podcast app such as Spotify, Deezer, Apple, or Google Podcasts. Hello. This is episode 15 of the Bak Up Podcast. In this episode, I have the opportunity to host an amazing individual whose resume could not fit in a piece of paper. He is a prominent engineer leader and entrepreneur who founded Fiddler.ai. Fiddler.ai is an AI startup, as you can tell, which explores the model monitoring space and hopes to make AI explainable. He is Krishna Gade. Krishna, welcome to the show.
Hi, Yanis. Thanks for having me on the show. It's very exciting to share what we've been working on at Fiddler, and also it was great to know you in the last few years that we've been in touch.
Awesome. And I really mean that your resume is stunning. Your trajectory is really appealing to me, starting from research and development to engineering/technical management to having your own company. One thing I noticed, though, is that you never stopped having an academic lens in your work. Your first cited work was in 2004, and your most recent paper about explainable AI was in 2020.
Right.
Although the themes of papers seem to change through time, from technical/theoretical to technical and engineering, and right now to the explainable space. Why did you keep publishing papers all these years?
Awesome.
Was there value to add to your professional life or something different?
Awesome. That's actually a very interesting insight. I've not thought about it. It was not really conscious, but I think when I was coming to the US to do grad school, doing research was one of the exciting parts of joining grad school in the US. And at the time, data mining was really hot. This is early 2000s. If people are old enough as me, there was this paper that came out of research from analyzing Walmart shopping transactions. One of the interesting insights of early 2000s were that the new fathers, when they leave for work and go to Walmart, when they buy beer, they also buy their diapers. So the association rules or the data mining techniques discovered that, and Walmart rearranged its shelves so that the diapers were close to the beers, and they saw like an increase in sales. So anyway, so the entire field of data mining kind of spawned, and I was working on research in University of Minnesota, and that's where I got a chance to publish papers there. And eventually I landed at Microsoft and Bing, which was also like an early stage project. So this has been one thing that has been constant, is most of the things that I've attempted have been new. Like whether, when I joined Bing, they were trying to build a search engine, which was like something new at Microsoft, and we were working with Microsoft Research. So I had a chance to collaborate with a lot of Microsoft researchers. I had in one day I was in a meeting with Jeffrey Ullman, the algorithms book author, and I was like, wow, I was pinching myself, right? So, and a few months later, I see my name also as a co-author list on the paper. So I think those were like exciting opportunities, that just came my way, and sort of continued along. And it turns out that even explainable AI is also a novel field. When we took up like the challenge of starting Fiddler, again, this was like a field that was still emerging. There's a lot more research that's happening, and part of being in this space is also to advance the state of the technology, right? So we do our own bit of research at Fiddler. We have published a paper on improving Shapley value-based explanations, and we got a Best Paper award at one of the conferences in 2020. So yeah, I think it's just been like it's not intentional, but I think it's I'm glad that it is happening the way it is.
Awesome. By the way, do you have a favorite one?
The paper, yeah. So I mean, obviously, my first paper, it's a blood and sweat, and it's sort of you remember it fondly, and it was also published at KDD, so which is a premier conference. So yeah, it was like in those days there were these algorithmic competitions that would exist in which is the fastest frequent pattern mining algorithm. So it was a paper around how to improve the speed of frequent pattern mining and sort of discover some new sort of patterns. We call build it like closed patterns, and so that would sort of make some interesting analysis possible. So yeah, that still remains my favorite, I would say.
Yeah, well, it kind of makes sense, right? Usually, when you're emotional about something, that's something that you remember the most. And to you touched a bit upon it, but to emphasize, you were writing all those papers at the same time you were either a developer or an engineering manager at
Right.
Pinterest, Twitter, Microsoft, Facebook.
Right. I think that's
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's quite interesting. So when I joined Twitter, we were building this real-time search engine, and we did some innovative stuff there. So we were trying to, in those days, search engines were mostly batch-oriented. So you would try to index the documents, and then they would be then available for searching. But because Twitter is a real-time platform, like we wanted to build a system that can surface up the tweet that was tweeted a few seconds ago in the search index, right? And we built the system, but then there was this professor who was kind of advising us like in the company, and he wanted to write a paper, and he collaborated with us to write a paper. So what has happened in this has become a trend with technology companies is that there is this industry's track of papers that has emerged in probably in the last 10 years. I think this probably all started with the MapReduce and GFS paper, right? They were probably the classical industry track papers, and ever since, most technology companies want to have some of their interesting infrastructure or technology to be showcased, and I think I was part of a few papers like that. We wrote a paper on Apache Storm, the real-time stream processing engine. We wrote some stuff on at Pinterest as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's
Storm,
just
the highest cited
just
one
became like
also.
a
Like a
right.
very, very popular paper.
Right.
Yeah, and I can definitely understand the need to for a company to have footprint in the academic to attract also talent, right? But
Right.
funny enough, there are people out there that they think these big companies are somewhat like cults. But what could you tell us about the
Yeah.
difference in work culture from one to another?
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting. I think each company has their own specialty. So when I was working at Microsoft, it was already a very large company. I joined early 2000s. By the time Bill Gates was on his last leg, and in fact, he probably have retired and kind of became like a chairman by the time. But the thing that was new was we were trying to build a search engine, which was like a startup within Microsoft. So we had a lot of autonomy and freedom to build our own thing. So our culture within Bing was slightly different from the rest of the Microsoft culture. There was a lot more autonomy. Bill G used to come and play table tennis with us and sit and with the relevance ranking lead and debug queries. It was fun, actually. It was like a startup experience. And then fast forward, the Valley startups that I was part of, especially Twitter, and it had its own different culture. It was one of those first SF startups, right? It had this San Francisco culture, which was very different from the Silicon Valley companies that were there before. And I think we had a lot of interesting functional programmers in Twitter. So there was a lot of enthusiasts around building systems in Scala and those kind of functional programming. I learned a lot about functional programming actually working at Twitter. It's a beautiful construct actually, and it helps making distributed systems really beautiful and scalable. And then Facebook is very different. By the way, they are mostly like a kind of get stuff done as quickly as possible, and it's really you can see that move fast, break things mentality in the company, right? There's very fast moving, and even when I joined, there were tens of thousands of people, at least 15,000 people when I joined, and it was surprisingly very fast moving, the way the pace at which it went, and even compared to smaller companies that I worked at before. So each company has its own thing. Some of it comes from the early days, how the culture gets formed, right? And this is something we are also trying to build at Fiddler. What is our culture and how do we define it? And in many ways, culture is what you do and not what you preach, right? It's kind of it gets shaped by the individuals that you hire and how you work with them and what gets prioritized in the company and what gets rewarded. So it's kind of organically develops over time.
Definitely more on that later. And one thing I have to say about people and to the listeners or viewers, people that write functional, Scala, Lisp, or whatnot, think they are a race above humans, so they're thinking that they are better than everybody else. Just saying. I
They're,
found.
they're, they're, they're nice people, except that I think they just want people to embrace immutability and all of those things, in a true manner. So
Yeah.
I can't blame them.
Definitely. I do enjoy their company. And right now, as we said, you're the CEO of Fiddler AI. We're going to talk in depth about Fiddler, but can you tell us what is Fiddler in a nutshell?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, Fiddler is a tool that helps machine learning engineers, monitor and explain their models in production. As machine learning is pervading across the industry, banking, insurance, healthcare, telecom, machine learning model is becoming the new software citizen within the technology stack, right? So it's you're trying to rewrite many software applications, to be model based applications, and so the two aspects of models that are problematic today is models change and vary in their predictive power because they're highly dependent on the data that they were trained with. So if I'm trying to create an underwriting model, as you know, I would take like a bunch of historical loans and try to predict the risk of those loans, and that model's accuracy is dependent on the training data that it was supplied with, and so as that data changes, it needs to be retrained. So monitoring becomes an essential aspect of how to keep these models on track. And the other part is, because models are actually not like transparent, in the sense you cannot open up a model and read its code, and like an imperative language, you cannot debug it step by step. It's very hard to know why they're predicting what they're predicting. So when it comes to answering a question, why was this person denied a loan, or why was this transaction classified as fraud, ML engineers or data scientists need ways to debug those questions, and that's where explainability becomes important. So Fiddler today provides those capabilities and acts as a lens into the models. And the hope for us is, by actually providing this visibility, we create a culture of trust around AI within the organization, so that companies can then invest a lot more in AI, can move more faster towards deploying AI in a safe and responsible manner, right? Because at the end of the day, there is a lot of business benefits that you can reap with the machine learning and AI, and if you do it, and if you do it with all visibility and explainability, you can do it in a more responsible, safe, and also in a manner that can help your business.
Yeah, that was very thorough. I'm pretty sure you have practiced that a lot, and well, you thought about the company, and I really wanted to know, because again, your trajectory is something that I really like seeing, because you were not an entrepreneur from the beginning. You just built up to it. What drove you to quit the tech giants and start your own company? And what exactly is the story behind the name?
Oh yeah, everyone asks us that question. I mean, I think it's always been a dream to come to Silicon Valley and start a company, right? And being an immigrant into the US, obviously you have to go through so many hurdles of getting your sort of visa and financial stability and all of that. So I've been fortunate to be worked in some really great companies. And my first taste into Silicon Valley was working at Twitter, which was like a life-changing experience for me, because I was quite early there. We were 100 people when I joined, and it was awesome to see a company grow from that small set, like a few people to thousands of people, and becoming like a giant platform. And so having seen that journey, that's where sort of the thought emerged, one day I should do my own startup, but it wasn't clear at the time what is the right idea and whatnot. And when I was working at Facebook, this is where I encountered the problem of explainability and monitoring. So we had a lot of machine learning models that we would run at Facebook for newsfeed, which is the main product that you see when you go to Facebook. And these models are used to recommend, news stories to you, which friends that you should follow, which stories that you should see, but also rank them in order of which we think, you're going to engage with. But then when these models are not performing well, or when they're affecting, let's say the business metrics are not going up, or, there's some dramatic changes that are happening, then it's hard to debug, hard to know how the models were performing. And when someone asks a question, hey, why am I seeing this recommendation in my feed, or why is this new story going viral, those are also very hard to answer, questions that were hard to answer for us. So that's where I got the opportunity to build a team that helped build a set of tools that allowed developers within newsfeed and then provide this visibility, and then also to other stakeholders. And that's where my journey started, and I saw that this is actually an interesting problem. It's technologically very hard. It's very important for businesses that are putting models into production, and it's something socially very important to solve for, right? Because you've seen all the issues that could happen with bias in machine learning and AI, and how it can affect the society. And so we thought this is an awesome opportunity, and it's worth leaving a cushy job and actually and putting a significant amount of your life behind it. So that's kind of what motivated me to start Fiddler.
Awesome, very inspiring.
And then the second question, I think everyone asks us. So we there was no like big sort of reason behind it. We wanted a name that was easy to remember, right? So we like names like Twitter, Looker, and like something that could become a verb, and that could be Google, right? So and then the first feature that we built in Fiddler was ability to interactively change the inputs to see the model outputs, and then explain how they're performing. So the counterfactual analysis of the models. And so we call that experience fiddling, and that's kind of where the name Fiddler came along. And it turns out that there are people that use the word fiddling with AI, so it's nicely fits with that paradigm.
Oh, definitely. I had a kind of idea of how we're gonna, like, what would the idea would be behind it. But yeah, thank you for putting the nail in the coffin. And we talk about culture in the companies that you worked so far. How would you describe the culture in Fiddler? That you said, and how you were inspired to draw it, and
Right.
Yeah, could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said at the beginning, culture, and I strictly believe that culture is what we do versus what we say. But having said that, when we started Fiddler, we wanted to have a set of values that we think are great, and we want to abide by during the journey, right? And so some of this also came from our experience working at other companies. So for example, one of the values at Fiddler is this value called you are the company. It's this a value that reflects extreme ownership, where people feel like that when they see a problem, they go and fix it, and versus complaining about it. And this is something I picked up from Facebook. There used to be this interesting sort of code that used to be written on Facebook walls, that there's no problem at Facebook that is nobody's problem. So essentially, if you see a problem, you go fix it, right? It was like I think it was also a company that had encouraged a lot of ownership. So that was one. And another value that we, I think, try to follow a lot is putting customers first, which is, I think, very important for us, because at the end of the day, we're building a platform that helps customers build responsible AI, and we want them to take as much value from the platform as possible. And then there are obviously other things around. We're very careful about what we are trying to build. We're building a product that is bridging the gap of trust between AI and human. And so we need to be very responsible in the technology choices that we make, right? And I think that's another thing that shows up as well. So I think we try to keep imbibe some of the best of the things that we have seen in other companies that we worked with, and also some of our own ideas that that make Fiddler unique. And I think that's kind of how I would describe the culture here.
That sounds amazing, and I'm 100% agreeing with you, and that is not what you tell people; it's what you do and how you do it.
Right.
The problem becomes when teams are growing and startups are growing,
Yeah.
right? So it's very hard to keep, and culture. Even my team is small. It's like a handful of people, like 6 people right now. It's hard to keep that going, you have to, in order to scale it up, you have to have it written somewhere and be very true to it in every in your every breath. That's how it's so hard and so important.
Absolutely.
But another thing that is hard is explainability. And explainability in ML is a very ill-defined space, and also everyone claims to be doing it at some degree. Like here's a logistic regulation, and immediately the model becomes explainable, right? Why did you choose something that hard? And maybe could you give us your definition of explainability?
Absolutely. So I think it was very clear to me when I was working in these tech companies that machine learning is and big data. I mean, there were already like technologies that were affecting the world in a big way, especially machine learning, AI are going to impact a lot of businesses in a big way, right? In fact, I would even go ahead and say that the ML ops or operationalized ML is going to dwarf like all of the software innovation that we've seen with respect to DevOps and all in the last few decades. I think there is like a reformatting of software that's happening. All the applications are being written as AI-based applications. Now, as I said, it's very hard for humans to trust and to lend critical decisions to someone else without the transparency. And I think there's a beautiful book called Sapiens. I don't know if people have read it. So there is this one concept called scalability of trust that made humans a very successful species. I think the author talks about how chimpanzees or gorillas cannot scale trust beyond 100 gorillas. If you put 1,000 gorillas together, they all divide up into factions. Whereas humans, we all can go to a baseball game. Thousands of people can sit in a stadium and can watch it. And hundreds of people can fly an airplane. Millions of people can live in a country. So I think that's because we live in this, like, we kind of scale trust with abstractions, with with transparency. I think when we are trying to move our business processes and critical decision workflows to AI-based systems from humans, that's what is happening, right? It's going to be very important for humans to know how those systems are going to work. That lack of transparency will prevent AI to be successful and therefore the business to reap benefits. That's where I believe explainability is super important. It bridges the gap between the human and the machine, and so that you can ask probing questions, you get answers, and you become comfortable to start using models more and more in businesses. And so for us, we wanted to make it a platform that bridges the gap. And so the technical challenge behind it was, how do you build something that can work across a variety of models, that can actually explain a variety of models trained on like different structured data sets, unstructured data sets, or like different types of models, tree-based models, neural networks. So that was a technical challenge, because you don't have models coming in one format. You don't have like a universal runtime to actually load all the models and infer them and predict them. So it was challenging to kind of make it work across different models. The other part was, how do you choose explainability? How do you choose a set of techniques that work across the board? And this is where we landed on this techniques that rely on attribution-based explanations. So they treat models more or less as black boxes and try to ask probing questions, with various different counterfactual inputs, and try to see how the model is emitting the answers, and then derive statistically significant, explanations from them. And that scales. And we found it to be, it works for different types of models. 80% of the use cases are covered with this type of platform, right? And that led us to say, okay, we can operationalize this as a service, because we didn't want to be a consulting company. We want to be a product company that people could use, right? And so, once we could do that, then it gave us confidence that we could actually, bring a service that can be deployed in production and can be used for this purpose. And then if you layer on monitoring on top of it, now you're, in addition to just ad hoc explanations, you're monitoring this model continuously. And so now it becomes a much more powerful service to actually give more insight to the user on how the models are performing.
Definitely on board with you on that one. But inherently to me, explainability in machine learning does not make sense, because we in a program, for any other program with
Right.
for machine learning, you can understand the logic of the you can understand when you end up in a state. With machine learning, you just have an objective function, and you just say the model just figure out a way of doing it. So you don't know yourself, and you're building a highly complex model. So you don't know yourself how the model is there, and you don't know how to interact with it. And I had an idea, and I spoke to in another episode that we're having a problem, an interface problem with we don't have the right interface to interact with the models. Because we're speaking a language, and the model is speaking like numbers. We can extrapolate when we're good at it and understand it. As you said, we're fiddling with the numbers. Okay, this is doing something. It's like poking the bear, right?
Exactly.
But there is no interface that goes right away to the human to interact with and explain it. In your eyes, what is the biggest challenge in explainability today?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. And I think we're barely scratching the surface of explainability, right? And in my opinion, explainability touches all of those things. User experience is a huge component of explainability, which is actually a lot of people don't pay attention to. And this is why we actually are working with this a great research lab out of Georgia Tech that works on model visualization and things like that. So we're starting a collaboration there. So I think the challenges of explainability across the board, right? So all the way from what you said, how do you define the right user experience? Explaining an NLP model is different from explaining a model that is working on structured data versus explaining a model that is trained on images, right? The form factor changes. The task that you're explaining will also change. Who's the person that reviewing the explanations will also affect the user experience. Is it the developer? Is it a business user? Is it a regulator? Like all of that will have an impact on what you want to show. And then the other part is you will never be able to truly explain a model. As you just said, as you ask one question. That's why this is a very interesting problem from a technical and research angle, because you ask one question, 10 questions pop up, right? Say like there's an underwriting model that denied a loan. The first question would be, why did it deny the loan? And you might say, okay, this person's FICO score was less than 660 or whatever. Why was this person accepted with when their score was similar or something? Or who else was denied along with this loan? Or why is that feature actually having so much importance to that model? So you answer all those questions, you get more questions. And so the goal for the explainer tool is to answer as many questions as possible so that the human can start building the trust, right? So and then after a point you kind of have enough confidence about how the model is working so you can actually start using it. So that is the and then eventually the holy grail is these insights that you're getting can help you train better models. This is the other use case. Once you start trusting it and using it in production, and when you actually are inspecting failure scenarios, then you may say, okay, why is the model underperforming? Why is the model predicting false positives here? And then see if you can use those explanations, those insights to train better features, better models, develop better features and things like that, or model architectures. So it's an incredibly exciting problem. It's almost like, Google search, right? Is there a perfect search engine in the world? No. Will there be ever? No. Will there be a perfect explainable AI platform ever in the world? No. And it's a holy grail, and you just keep trying to answer as many questions as possible.
Yeah, that was a really good analogy. But right now you have a product though, and product is all about impact. Could you talk about one use case of yours that the impact of Fiddler was so apparent that it was too good to be true?
Absolutely. I think it was very interesting. So for one of the early customers that we were working with was a very popular recruiting company out of SF called Hire.com. And they were using deep learning for assessing resumes. And previously they were using more simpler models and they obviously built up more complex models over time to process resumes, because they were creating an auto curation system to accept resumes into their pipeline, right? And while they achieved high performance and higher accuracy with the deep learning models, they lost a lot of transparency into what resumes were getting accepted, why were they accepted. And because it's a recruiting space, and they have to make sure that they know the reasons why they're rejecting certain resume, or they want to monitor whether they're equitably accepting all kinds of people, right? And so this is where Fiddler helped provide that visibility. They would get questions. This was a company where everyone would ask, hey, my friend applied, why was he rejected by our system, right? And so this tool helped answer all those questions, and they also put it in monitoring, so that we're monitoring their models. They had a dozen deep learning models that were making these decisions, and we would monitor them and set up alerts when these models drift. In fact, one of the very first things which we caught was there was like a model drift that was happening, where they introduced a couple of features in training, but they were not present in production, and they did not know about it. And Fiddler was able to catch, hey, these two features are not getting populated, and you may have to send data for them, right? And then more importantly, they had also brought in some business users. They had some sort of operations people that would review resumes, especially rejected resumes, and see why they were getting rejected, and so that they can offer customer support to the humans, saying that, hey, maybe you should do this, or maybe you can try and sort of improve upon this in the profile, right? And so I think this was also another big use case, so that this was actually the bridging that gap, right? Bringing multiple stakeholders together. And so it was a very satisfying use case that we worked with them, and it affected their business in a fundamental manner. Yeah.
It's interesting, and it's one of those delicate problems that, like as you mentioned, and all of the problems that you stated today, like getting accepted for a loan, getting
Right.
your resume across the board. All these are very sensitive to the society that we live in. But also. Fiddler is a successful company, so, and they Fiddler had a successful round Series B of 32 million, led by Insight Partners. I could imagine raising capital must be very, very nerve-wracking. Could you walk us through the most tense moment of the whole process?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, like anything, fundraising is an art and science. And so you have to, get everything right and you have to obviously have the partners that are interested in this problem and who are invested to sort of contribute, right? Because at the end of the day, very few startups become successful, right? And VCs also know it. But what you're looking for is a true partner who's not there just to give you money, but essentially who will be there to help you and along with the journey. And that's what we got with Insight. When we were actually we were busy building the company when we actually got approached by them, and so we really liked George Matthew, who's like the partner who led the round. The specialty with George was he was not a traditional investor. He was actually an entrepreneur and operator before. He was a chief operating officer of Alteryx, which is a very popular analytics tool. He took the company public. And he had another startup after that. So we really liked George. We had an instant connection because he came from he was like us. He had an entrepreneurial experience and he was kind of been there, done that, and went through a whole bunch of problems and challenges himself, right? And he had a very unique thesis on the MLOps workflow, which was very appealing to us. So I think that's what motivated us to kind of engage, and sort of we and then everything clicked and we sort of went forward, right? But in general, I think any fundraising process is about building relationships with individuals, because at the end of the day, money is important to build a startup, but I think human relationships, like anything in business, I think how strong your relationships are with your investors and board partners is going to be super important. So and when you're raising around, it's almost like dating, right? So you're trying to you're trying to get to know the people, and you're trying to see if you connect with them, they connect with the problem that you're working on, because they have to be also as passionate as you are on the problem that you're working on, right? And that's when they will also be excited to invest in. And so that's what you have to get going. And I think it's just, it takes time to figure out who those right partners are. And sometimes you get lucky, so you might find them very quickly. Sometimes you have to go and sort of find them, right? Like go through a whole bunch of pitches and try to refine what you're trying to solve. And that's what happened to us over a period of time.
I love the analogy of dating. Yeah, and dating can be very nerve wracking for sure.
Right.
But when you get capital, you get more people. You get to scale up and work on a very and start increase your throughput. So, what are you working on right now? Any new features that we should be excited for?
Absolutely, yeah. So we are working on a new update to our machine learning monitoring product. So we're adding several new features. One of the things that we are very excited about is to be able to, like right now, when you monitor the model, let's say you're knowing like the performance of the model at a very high level, right? Like the AUC of the model is 0.85 or the precision is 0.9 or whatever, high precision, high AUC. But you may have pockets within your data set that may be actually underperforming, right? And they may have some certain common patterns to it, and if that happens, it could be like a whole set of gender that is getting undermined by the model. It could be a set of people on a particular region, or it could be whatever characteristic that, right? And so we are building a way to slice the data and automatically see which slices are actually underperforming and which slices are performing well with respect to the model. This helps the data scientist to know, even though the model may be performing well at holistically, are there pockets of things where the model may be underperforming, and see what we can do with it. Maybe you may have to train better features, or like the features may be incorrect, or like the data we don't have enough representation in the training data for those data points, or maybe the model architecture is not serving that population really well. So I think this is very exciting. So we're working on this slice monitoring and automatic slicing of data to surface of these insights. And then a few other things on explainability, we're working on ability to explain sort of recourse style explanations, kind of extending the counterfactual, where today we can explain saying that, okay, your loan prediction was 0.3 or whatever, your risk prediction was, these are the reasons, right? But a typical question is, what would it take for this person to get accepted? Let's say the threshold for risk to acceptance is 0.15 or whatever. And so this is called a recourse style prediction explanation, where you want to see how you can successfully carry that person across the line, and what is the model expecting from the person. And so if you know that, then this will help your customer support teams, right? So you can then go inform the person, hey, if you could just come back with when you have a few points higher in FICO, or like if you have a few more, like a few more dollars of income, then we may be able to accept you for that loan request, right? So that's the second sort of thing that I'm excited about. Yeah.
That is so awesome, and I think that like the impact that it's gonna empower like many people to do their jobs better, which is what machine learning it's ultimately designed to do, and AI in general. Krishna, that was awesome. We wish you all the best to fiddler.ai. And thank you so much for coming and helping us back us up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Yanis. It's a pleasure. Great questions, and super fun conversation.
Awesome.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. This is it. Your mind is now backed up. To learn more about the topics discussed or the guests, follow the links in the description. Now you have the chance to subscribe, rate, like, dislike, and review the show. Also, looking forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, and see you next time.